Okay, Brian, there's no doubt in anyone's mind when they hear this. Queen rocks.
Yeah, well, I think Queen always did rock and hopefully always will. But this is something different. I mean, this album is the first Queen album ever where you get solid rock from beginning to end, I guess. You know, we always had light and shade on the old Queen albums, very deliberately. The albums were meant to be something which were balanced and you could enjoy as a complete whole. This one is meant to just kick all the way through, and I think it really does. So for the first time you're hearing the hard rock end of Queen from beginning to end. We really started life as a hard rock band, in a sense, and it was always adrenaline on stage. It was always that we went for the jugular on stage. The albums had a lot of rock stuff on, but of course the public perception isn't always the same, because the singles would generally not be the hard rock tracks, simply because you can't get hard rock tracks played on the radio, you know, then as now. So for instance, Sheer Heart Attack was probably the hardest album we ever made in terms of, you know, rock, pure rock album, but the single was Killer Queen, which really is kind of is a I think a very good pop record, but a pop record nevertheless. And it was very untypical of what the band were on stage and even what they were on that album. So it's nice to be able to distill all the adrenaline from all the different albums and get them on one album. I think it's I was excited. I'm surprised that I am excited as well. You know, it's also nice to have something out there for us, you know, because it's we've all been out doing our different things the last 5 years or so. I mean, nearly 6 years since Freddie left us. And we've been very much busy in other directions, which we had to be. And suddenly to have something out there with Queen on it is a thrill. It's nice. And I'm glad that people are still interested enough to warrant it happening.
And the way it's going now, it's shaping up to be a pretty big album.
Yeah, I'm surprised the reaction it's got already, I must say. It seems to be very positive. We just came back from Germany and they are all over the album. I was quite amazed.
Now, on the album, you've got one remake, I Can't Live With You. It's sort of, well, is remake the right word?
Pretty much, yes. I Can't Live With You was a track which started off in the studio with the three of us playing it. And there were problems in getting it to work because it was halfway between a sort of funk thing and a rock thing. And somehow, although the live stuff sounded heavier, it didn't have the feel. It just didn't have the sort of the bounce that it needed. And it was a difficult time, you know. Sometimes we didn't get on very well in the studio, and it was perhaps hard for me to communicate to Roger what I wanted. It was hard for Roger to communicate to me the way he saw it. And what happened was, generally, the person who writes the song eventually makes a decision to move the thing forward. And in this case, I wrote the song, so I did. And I said, look, it doesn't work the way we've been doing it. So we did it with mostly programmed drums and a lot of keyboards and stuff. And it was built very much as a pop record. And Roger never forgave me because it didn't end up with having him on it, you know. So I don't blame him, really. And I think we've all grown up a little bit more. So when he suggested that we redo it, I sort of understood where he was coming from. And I also thought it was a good idea because now you have technology much more than you had in those days. So we were able to take the original drum track and work on it on the computer and just get rid of all those things where we disagreed about what the timings were. Having done that, it all sounds glittering and wonderful. So I was moved to play new guitar to it. So it's now a much heavier thing all round. So it's a bit like some of those tracks on the Made in Heaven album. All that's left of the original really is the vocal, and even that we did a little work on, and just odd little bits.
Some modern technology's been used to finish this album off. You've used a lot of toys in the studio. The way technology's going and moving, is it something you think you will embrace in the future, or you don't want to have any part of?
No, I think we look at everything and we use everything. We just try and make sure it doesn't use us. You know, if you're not careful, you can shoulder yourself out of the recording process. You know, you take the humanity out of it. So I sit there with my Pro Logic and stuff on the Apple Mac, and it's a fantastic writing tool. You can program the drums, you know, I can program bass in there, I can play a bit of guitar, sing, everything's on the computer. But there comes a point where you have to step back and say, right, what am I trying to do here? Am I trying to make an imitation of what it would be like if there was a band playing it? And if the answer is yes, you have to stop at that point and bring the band in, and you have to work on it on a human level, and it suddenly becomes 5 times as good. It's an event, it's amazing, you know. There is something about groups and something about the interaction thing between musicians. And I've used Cozy Powell a lot on this record, the solo record I'm working on at the moment, as I did on the last one. And he gets me out of holes all the time, you know. I'll say, look, I think this is how it should go. And I've programmed it with the idea that he's going to do it that way, you know. But he'll come in and go, okay, yeah, I know what you mean, but try this. And instantly you're in a different world, you know, and I get in there and play with him, and it's a different, suddenly it's real.
Now, Seven Seas of Rye is on the album, which a lot of people imagine is the beginning of Queen.
Yeah.
Going back then and starting off, how did everybody react to the band? What did your mum think of Freddie?
She liked him. I don't think there was any problem there. I'm just trying to think. Well, we knew each other as friends before we were in a group together, and he used to come round my house. I mean, it was very odd because we both lived in Feltham, about 300 yards away from each other, and never met until that point, which was when we were, how old, 25 or something? Very odd. And I used to go around his house. I have very vivid memories of meeting his mum. I'm afraid he was very much like his mum. Very, you know, I see his mum occasionally now, and it's striking how close they are. And I always remember going around Freddie's place, and he would play me things and say, listen to this, listen to this, listen to this. You have to hear this, you have to hear this. He was like that in those days. He was like always overexcited. Great, you know, he's always so enthusiastic. And he had this tiny little Dansette record player, I think it was, with a speaker in each end of the box. It's just a little box. You can't see my hands at this point, but they're about 2 feet apart. So the two speakers of the stereo are 2 feet apart in opposite directions. And he would sort of manoeuvre me around. He said, look, listen to this bit now. Then you have to come around here and hear this bit. And it was a Hendrix album, obviously, because he loved Hendrix. So we would listen to all these production techniques and talk about what we would do once we got the chance to get in the studio. It was a long time before we did, really. It was a long, frustrating road that we trod. But we knew what we wanted once we got in there.
It'd be interesting from the perspective of someone that's followed your career or delved into the history of Queen to hear that word frustrating. Because from all appearances, it was instant fame and celebrity.
I'm sure it seems that way, yeah. Instant overnight success. And, well, of course, the 4 or 5 years where you're struggling aren't seen. You know, it was very frustrating. In fact, we thought we'd missed the boat, I think. We were together for quite a long time, and we did nothing but rehearse and write. And we felt that we really had something, you know, being precocious young boys. We thought we had something better than anyone else out there. And then a lot of things happened, you know, in the time that we were sort of struggling to try and find a record contract. David Bowie rose from playing, you know, very small theatres, half full, to being a megastar. Roxy Music came. We saw all these groups getting huge radio play and playing huge gigs, and we hadn't any idea how to get there, you know, how to start, because promoters weren't interested unless you had a record deal, and no record company was interested unless you'd played the gigs and had a following. So it's chicken and the egg, it's catch-22 or whatever you want to call it. There didn't seem to be any way in whatsoever. And I remember just sitting listening to the radio and getting so depressed. But we were ready when the little breaks came. We had a break. The first break was that we went into a studio and were able to make a noise and actually make a tape, a proper demo tape. And the second break was that we had friends who worked very hard and took the tapes around to all the record companies, who all said no. They all said, yeah, come back in a couple of years' time or whatever. But it was the first step on the road. And so around 1970, I'm trying to think what it was, 71, whatever, we finally had a record deal with a production company who were licensing us to a record company. And what they did was put us in the dark time of their studio. So if there wasn't an artist in there recording for a couple of hours, like from 5 a.m. to 7 a.m., they would call us and we would go in and do our bit and then be shunted out when the next guy came in. And they would lose the tapes, and it was just Well, the industry, as always, I think, is scared. You know, they don't want to back a horse which isn't going to make it to the winning post. And the only way people, on the whole, become convinced that they want to sign an artist is if they're convinced that someone else is about to sign them. You know, it's human nature. And that's exactly what happened with us. We took all these demo tapes around, 5 songs. Everybody said no. Took the whole thing around, took the same songs around, a year later. And by that time there was a buzz, there was a rumour that somebody wanted to sign us. And so everyone wanted to sign us. the music wasn't any different. We weren't any different.
Yeah, not any different, but certainly a different band. On the first big hit, Seven Seas of Rye, it ends up with a jolly version of I Do Like to Live Beside the Seaside. Queen do have some very un-rock and roll kind of influences now and again.
I think that's the sort of unconscious influences in us. We all grew up listening to Uncle Mac's children's favourites when we were kids, and the Thunder and Lightning Polka and the Laughing Policeman. That's our generation. So it's all in there. And George Formby was a hero of my dad, the great, very underestimated ukulele player, actually. If you ever see his films, he's a funny little man, but he's a brilliant player. And that was the whole thing. I really learnt a lot of what I have in me from, doing George Formby things through my dad. So it's great in a way because you come to it from such a different angle. I think most people who go to rock school now don't start on George Formby because everybody's very, very technically inclined, but we didn't. Me and my sort of contemporaries or whatever didn't have any sort of guitar culture to draw on. There wasn't any. So all you did was go out and buy anything which had a guitar on it. So I had Charlie Bird, who's a sort of jazz acoustic player, very accomplished. I had Chet Atkins, who's a country player. I had Paco Peña, who was just beginning. He happened to be a friend of a friend, but just a flamenco player, wonderful player. And Django Reinhardt. That's about it, really. That's all there was. So there wasn't, apart from a few little gems on record. So, I didn't even know who the people were. But it's actually James Burton, who would do little bits on Everly Brothers records and Elvis records and stuff. Steve Cropper, who was in Booker T of Green Onions fame, And I remember we used to, as kids, just pore over those little tiny bits of bent notes in the solos and try and figure out how they did it. I'm certainly not complaining because if I had to start and be a guitar player now, I think I would fail miserably because the standard out there is so incredibly good. And I was lucky in a way because it was in the beginning and I was able to sort of define a style of my own at a time when there wasn't much out there, So I regard myself as lucky.
Well, as a guitar player, with the way things go now, you can sample everything and loop it. And what are your thoughts? Is there a genuine future for a real guitarist?
I don't think there's any question. I think there's much future for the guitar because the rock guitar, as we have come to know it, is very much like a voice. And the voice is something which, no matter how hard you try with sampling, you can't do without the singer. I know there are dance records where they sample the same 3 words over and over again, but that ain't music to me. That's something different. If you want to make a song that works on your emotions, it's a communication thing, and there's no substitute for the human voice and the human presence. And I think the electric guitar, is very similar to that. It's a very vocal thing now for everybody. That was kind of my dream when I was a kid. I was hoping that I could play guitar in a way which would be like a voice. It would have that sort of articulation and emotion and stuff. And I'm happy to say that that's become sort of taken up by a lot of very brilliant guitar players these days. I think guitar playing is in a very healthy state and has a good future. I suppose we were at the crossroads. The guitar had just become available as an instrument in that sense. I'm not talking about the classical guitar, but the guitar which is a sort of which has infinite variation of pitch, like because of the bending of strings, so it's on a par with a violin or something. It had just come into existence, and you're at the crossroads between playing pure melodic stuff like the Shadows did, and on the other side the pure blues approach like the Yardbirds were doing. And I remember looking at all this stuff and thinking probably there is something in the middle of all that which is where I would like to be. The passion of the blues, the sort of earthiness of the blues, the spontaneity of the blues, but melody and harmony and structure, if that could all be fused into something, I remember thinking that would be great, And Jeff Beck was a huge influence on me. And there's a solo which he did for Hi Ho Silver Lining, and I know he hates the record, but it's a milestone for me because he double-tracked the solo, as you know, I'm sure you know. And there's a couple of notes in the middle where he double-tracked it slightly wrong, if it was going for a double track, and it went into harmony, and I just freaked. I just thought that was the most wonderful sound to hear that. And it was my dream to work on guitar harmonies like you would in an orchestra, and go into that world, because I felt that the guitar was such a passionate voice. It would be amazing to hear a number of guitars working together, all with passion and all actually having a sense, a structure.
Now, the new track, No One But You,
Yeah.
it's the first new Queen song in quite a long time.
I never thought that we'd have a new Queen track to put on it. That's the major surprise, I suppose. I didn't think we'd be sitting here talking about a new Queen track in 1997. But it happened, so very happy and very, very pleased with the way it came out.
Well, the song's obviously about Freddie's death, but it has reverberations more globally too as we come towards the end of the century, which is a huge thing. There's been some recent deaths, Gianni Versace, Princess Diana. All these things seem to come into the song. Is it something you thought about?
Yes, we were aware of it all, definitely. I think that's why Roger rang me up and told me that he thought it was such an important song, because he doesn't often do that. Roger and I are very competitive. We don't give each other much leash, And he rang me up very excited and saying, we have to do this as a Queen track and not as your solo track. Because I originally invited him to play drums on my solo album for this track. And he said, look, I really feel it's important, and, it's important for Freddie. And since we'd been involved with the Béjar Ballet, which Gianni Versace did the costumes for, he went, and then we were just floored by the tragedy of Princess Diana. So we suddenly looked at this song and thought, oh, there is really something going on here, and this song seems to express it. Then you have a strange kind of self-exploration, because we all sat in the room and thought, well, we all think this is important. Why do we think this is important? And what are we trying to do here? We don't want to get into the realms of sort of feeding off Princess Diana's death. That would be totally wrong. We also don't want to kind of belittle what's happened here and pretend that we only care about Freddie. All these sort of things came up, and what we did really was delay. It was convenient because we could have put it out, but having recorded it, which I've missed out in the history, but we thought it would be nice. The place for it was probably on this Queen Rocks album, because it was an extra little taster, and it was just a little bit of distance. The smoke had died down a bit, and maybe people would be ready to take a broader view, and maybe a more optimistic view of the strange way in which life unfolds, and the apparently unfair way that it unfolds.
Yeah, expressing the things we all feel about life. Is that what you see the job of a musician is?
I think we feel that above all else, that is a musician's job. Yeah, the musician's job is to sort of put into words what people have in their hearts and can't quite get out. If you can do that as a writer and as a performer, then you're sort of close to where you ought to be as a musician. That's doing your job. Sometimes it takes you to dangerous areas, and this was so personal and so raw when we were listening to it. It was almost, we always thought we'd rather not put it out. It was almost like, oh, let's put it away. It's a bit too kind of, it moves you a bit too much at this point, But there is a joy in it, I will say that. I think the song has a great optimism and a joy. I hope so anyway, to people.
And in the song there's a quote, a piano phrase from a famous old 60s song called Love Letters by Kenny Lester. Was that an accident or did you mean it?
It was very conscious, and it goes all the way back. I'll fill in the gaps. There's Kenny Lester, and I never heard anything like that before in my life. I don't know if you ever did. Maybe we're too young to know where that came from. But it seemed to come out of nowhere, didn't it? That wonderful feel on the piano. And then there is John Lennon's God track, which is a conscious quote of Kenny Lester, really. And it has exactly that feel. And there is also, alongside that, one of our own tracks, which is called In the Lap of the Gods. So if you put that on, you'll hear Freddie doing that thing, and it's very much Freddie's piano style. And again, the same sort of feel. And that was our first ever stage closer. It was like the original Queen anthem. It's in the lap of the gods. Whoa, 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 whoa. And it was the big dry ice and smoke number. And the first time that people started this waving anthemic thing, which became a sort of Queen thing, the scarves in the air, lump in the throat, let's go for it. And that was the first. So I was very consciously, I sort of let it all come out, and I knew all those ingredients were in there. Lennon's thing is very pertinent because I actually did Lennon's song on my last tour, because he was talking about the breakup of the Beatles and the sort of potential disintegration of his life and his loss of belief in everything. And it was very similar to what we were going through, because of the loss of Queen, the loss of Freddie. I actually lost my dad at that point. So I sang that song every night on tour, and it was a good sort of therapy for me. So all that's in there, and No One But You has all that parentage, and I feel absolutely upfront about that, because there's something in there which is right for the time, as you say.